So I want to share a few words with you. They're really a culmination of study that I have been undertaking for several months. And they grew out of a class that I was teaching on the book of Bamidbar, which is a really complicated book of the Torah. Because it's all about these people that are making this journey, and along the way, it's fraught with complaints and with rebellion and with deception and with the earth swallowing people and all kinds of strange talking donkeys. And you're reading this book and you're trying to figure out and cut through it. What is really the message of the book? And one of the things that has been persisting in my thinking is that part of the people's journey from Mount Sinai, in which they stood and witnessed the presence of God, absolute truth, and the journey to the promised land where that absolute truth will be manifest, goes through this incredibly dark space. And as they do it, there's this sense of regression. The people go back, they're constantly complaining about how it used to be better in the place that they came. And I thought about this because I thought that regression is a very important psychological concept. We notice it in children. We can even identify it in adults as individuals. But as a society, can a society go through a regression as well? And my hunch is that there may be elements of that we're experiencing today. So in Rosh Hashanah, I'll be talking about how do we confront that? How do we confront the change, which is usually what regression is all about? The uncertainty that lays ahead and our capacity and our ability to respond to it. And then Yom Kippur to talk about it as it affects us. But to begin, you should know that we have to define who we are. And Jews are an anxious people. And this has certainly fueled the careers of writers like Philip Roth and Woody Allen and virtually every comedian under the sun. And we could maybe look at it and say it's our unique relationship with God. Or maybe it's our history of being a minority people constantly struggling for our survival. The connection to the Jewish people and anxiety is well known. So let's get a definition of anxiety. Here is one definition of anxiety. Anxiety is the overestimation of threats plus the underestimation of the ability to cope. That sounds like us. In fact, there was a historian, Simon Rabinowitz, who coined a term for this anxiety that Jewish people manifest. He called us the ever-dying people. We've made, in today's terms, anxiety an art form. But anxiety isn't just a Jewish trait alone anymore. This prevalence of anxiety is saturating the general culture too. This is an unprecedented moment. For those who study history, it is unprecedented. And it's captured in books like the San Diego State University professor Gene Twenge's book in 2018 called iGen. Our super connected kids are growing up less rebellious, more tolerant, and completely unprepared for adulthood. Our children are completely unprepared for adulthood. Now that is some good anxiety. But the book reveals through its study that, yes, the riskier and even life-threatening behavior of our children, of our teens, is plummeting. significantly. Yet, lacking any real direction or guidance for what the world asks of them, our emerging young adults are anxious for what lays ahead on the horizon, responsible adulthood. The stunning truth is, we don't know what to model for them either. You see, our children today are spending their quality time trying to associate and make sense of their anxious lives, their anxious parents, their anxious world. And while we, their parents, are begrudgingly giving them cell phones and computers and iPads and this widespread access to infinite information, everything that they see reinforces this anxiety, overestimations of threats, and underestimations of an ability to cope. Where we assume that even this anxious bonding is at least a connection of some sort, studies are showing, and you know this, that screen activities are linked to more loneliness, and non-screen activities are linked to less loneliness. We Jews have a joke about this. There's these 4 women that are sitting on a park bench in Lake Balboa, and they're sitting silently, and all of a sudden, one of the women breathes in and heaves out an oi, oi. And some more silence emerges. The second woman takes a deep breath in, shakes her head, says, oy vey. And the third among them breathes and exhales. Breathes in, shakes her head, shrugs her shoulders, and says, oy vey is mir. And then the fourth one breaks the silence and says, I thought we weren't going to be talking about our children. Our children may be sitting on park benches together watching everyone's thrilling lives unfold before their very eyes. As voyeurs into other people's lives, our children must be wondering if who they are is just as much, if not in some way similar to the lives of others. Our kids are going to these lavish B'nai Mitzvah parties where the entertainment is over the top to celebrate their place and their identity in our people. And there's more attention given to the screens. I dare say that some of you might be scrolling through your Facebook feed right now. All this watching turns into years of time spent peering into the lives of others. And we are now watching a generation of young people emerge who simply are not figuring out how to live lives on their own terms. Yes, today's youth are empowered with the same information we have to maneuver through the perils of modernity. Yet they lack the most significant tool vital to the interpretation of all this knowledge: wisdom. Meanwhile, we are impatiently looking for an answer. Not the answer, an answer. And so we look to the Rabbis of our day, to Google and to Facebook and to Twitter and the 24-hour news cycle to temporarily assuage our fears that these uncertain tomorrows don't have the answers necessary for living a holy life. Alexa really answers all. Answers, but no wisdom. Jewish anxiety is being supplanted by the anxiety of the greater culture. And anxiety is the response to a change when we're fearful that we can't adapt. It's an overestimation of the threat and an underestimation of our ability to cope. I highly doubt that the makers of the iPhone at Apple Computers or the folks at Amazon who built the Alexa device were thinking that these things would cause such anxiety. Instead of meeting the challenge, though, we are hiding behind the screens. We have constructed these elegant worlds of avoidance, shaded in blissful comfort, while the world rages aflame. Judaism is not the religion of anxiety. It is the religion of wisdom. And wisdom is much more than a how-to that is filmed in fast forward. Wisdom is not gained by peering into someone else's life or shouting into an empty room waiting for a calm voice responding to our anxious needs. Wisdom comes from meeting challenges, overcoming obstacles, and more often than not, meeting failure. Our kids are not having enough of these experiences. Perhaps it's been in our love for them. Perhaps it's been in battling our own anxieties. But maybe we have been protecting them too much. Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt recognize this lack of wisdom and overprotective sensibility in their studies reflected in the recent book, the late 2018 book called The Coddling of the American Mind. There they note, we adapt to our new and improved circumstances and then lower the bar for what we count as intolerable levels of discomfort and risk. By the standards of our great-grandparents, nearly all of us are coddled. Each generation tends to see the one after it as weak and whiny and lacking in resilience. Those older generations may have a point, they write. That's why it should shock us to hear that our kids will say when surveyed, "My life is not useful," with feelings of uselessness reaching all-time highs. Today's youth, quote, aren't even convinced that their education will help them get good jobs and give them information that they will need later. Fewer 12th graders today now believe that school will help them later in life. And fewer believe that doing well in school is important for getting a good job. Is it perhaps that our children don't see their place in the world that we have tirelessly, carefully, and even anxiously prepared for them? Who is teaching our children that their lives have infinite value? Overconnected, overstimulated, and underdeveloped. There's no Google search, no downloadable app, no clever vocabulary we've given our children or used for ourselves to pass on this wisdom. If our kids aren't seeing the usefulness of their lives, what good are all these comforts and security that we are giving them in our days anyway? The problem is uncertainty. The problem is what we see ahead of us is unclear, and the wisdom, as has always been for us as Jews, wisdom. Let's return to something we know that works quite well for times of uncertainty. Quite well. Religious communities. Religious communities don't merely exist as destinations for life cycle celebrations. Religious communities are centrifugal forces of meaning and connection. That's what they are. And the Jewish people have persisted throughout the millennia because we continue to prove in religious community the words of someone who is not of the Jewish people, Margaret Mead, and said, "Never doubt that a small group of people, thoughtful and committed citizens, can change the world. Indeed, it's the only thing that ever has. Meaning and connections change the world. In Judaism, wisdom is our conduit of meaning and connection. What we do here really matters. It really matters. It's not just a quick 2-minute clip on the YouTube and move on to something else of interest. What we do here really matters. What we say here and what we do has a significant impact beyond the little shtetl of Densmore and Ventura Boulevard. We are well proven as a people to be the bellwethers of social change. We are or legoyim. We are lights unto the nations. And the moment our anxieties are met with wisdom and not with fear, but with what we call loving change, the world will surely follow. So our response is that our heritage is much more than long prayer services and insufferable appeals for money. We are ready here and prepared to make a difference in your life, the difference in the lives of all of us as a community. And we are prepared to make differences in the world around us. There's one essential piece of this loving change idea that we need to discuss. It's being comfortable with what we call the languages of Judaism. The languages of Judaism can help our children discover the treasures of our heritage and confront anxieties wherever they are manifest with real wisdom. But that is a language just like any other language. And it cannot be spoken occasionally, once or twice a year, a few times, when special moments arise. It requires practice. It requires depth. We may not be Hebrew speakers. We may not be Yiddish speakers, although it's having a revival in New York. But we can speak the languages of Judaism. What we need is nothing less than a total recommitment to this Jewish literacy. And from our languages of Judaism, we can ultimately reclaim our sacred wisdom, the solution to the anxieties of our day. To give you an example, my children attend the school up on the hill, and I am proud that the school has published this idea called the Portrait of a Graduate. It's a helpful conceit because it enables us, as parents of students in the school, to come to know what to expect from a milk and school education. Many schools do this, not only in the Los Angeles area, but across the country. But the goal is not to attain admission into the most prestigious universities, chas v'shalom. Any school would claim such a goal, let alone the staggering proposition of the economic consequences of that goal. Rather, the goal in the Portrait of the Graduate is to create responsible human beings, lovers of learning, and committed citizens of a grand and complex world. So what if Valley Beth Shalom had a portrait of a 21st century Jew? What would that look like? This Rosh Hashanah, let's think about our Judaism in these terms and see what we discover together. Sacred wisdom, sacred behavior, sacred family, and sacred presence. I imagine the model looks like this. We've got sacred wisdom. Committing to a life of Torah study is the definition of a good life. Very little of the models of human behavior today exemplify this goal. See, the good life is more than limitless free choice, unlimited streaming on our devices, Epicurean culinary delights, and tranquil beach locales with a servant bringing us a tequila with a freshly squeezed lime in it. Our rabbis have this vision of a good life, albeit limited. Thousands of years ago, they wrote, "This is the way of the student of Torah. Eat a crusty piece of bread, ration your drinking water, sleep on the ground, live a life of privation, exhaust yourself in Torah study. If you live in this life, if you live life in this manner, you will be happy in this world, and all will go well with you in the world to come." No. Sacred wisdom is not consumed like a salty, crusty piece of bread with minimal amounts of water. It is in a vibrant, dynamic community where nearly every day during the week, Torah is learned here. So you, all of us, make a commitment to learn Torah this year. Come on a weekly basis. Study on a periodic basis. Meet the sacred wisdom here. We are waiting for your story to be written into that grand narrative of our Torah for today and tomorrow. Second, we've got sacred behavior. It's Maimonides who offers us the sage guidance. One who settles in a city for 30 days is obligated to contribute to the charity fund, together with the other members of the community. One who settles here for 3 months must become obligated to contribute to the soup kitchen. One who settles there for 6 months becomes obligated to contribute clothing with which the poor of the community can cover themselves. One who settles there for 9 months becomes obligated to contribute to the burial fund for burying the community's poor and providing for all their needs of burial. This is not just theory. Taking responsibility isn't a mandated community service project. It is the total commitment to supporting the institutions that provide health and security for all of us, especially the most vulnerable among us. It's also the resource that we can reflexively embrace when we need it the most, when our needs are greater than we can handle alone. There is no anxiety in asking for help when you have done your part to help others. And when you invest time in the project of a community, you give more than you could ever expect to gain in return. We've got sacred circles of caring family. I was walking into the synagogue not too long ago, a few months ago, with my daughter. It was on a Shabbat morning, and we came up upon the conversation about Shabbat observance and synagogue participation in general. In sharing the goals and purposes of Shabbat observance, I simply offered her a conceptual frame for her and for me about why we do what we do and what are my expectations for her in her growing independence. Simply put, I told her, I want her to always have an idea of Shabbat in her mind. Whether it's celebrated in a synagogue, or with lighting candles and making kiddush at home, or with no ritual at all, I want her always to have the sense that one day out of 7 is vital to her physical, emotional, and spiritual well-being, and it also happens to be the way the world was created too. We've got a sacred presence with eternal values. Our heroes are Abraham and Sarah, who teach us to be a blessing in the world. Our teachers are Moshe and Aharon, who remind us that we are a kingdom of priests and a holy nation, that loving freedom and protecting the tradition and caring for the most vulnerable among us are what defines a good life. Our models are Miriam, whose response to God's presence is with dance and rejoicing with timbrel and drums. This Torah of ours teaches us a way. It is an antidote to anxiety. It is sacred mastery. The portrait of a 21st century Jew is mastered by overcoming the anxiety with sacred wisdom, sacred behavior, sacred family, and sacred presence. Tamar Chansky, the author who defined anxiety, teaches us what this mastery is. It is the act of shrinking fear by fact-checking and approaching the solution in small steps. The gifts of the Jews to the world is factually proven. Gifts of history, empathy, righteous action, loving family, and sacred time. Mind you, it's not an easy Judaism. It's not digestible in a couple minutes. But when we participate in this world that we are creating and passing on to our children and grandchildren, one clear message rings true. Judaism provides small and large steps to help us achieve mastery of our souls. Small steps begin here with learning, worship, sacred action, and connection. So, as Rosh Hashanah nears conclusion, the gifts that we begin to give ourselves through these days of reflection and permission to change, I hope you take on the change lovingly. Love the change. Between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, make a plan, some plan to change your behavior for the better. Small steps, and checking the facts that that change is possible. Because the most confident message of all that you hear reinforced in our sacred gathering is this: we have more than anxiety. We have Jewish wisdom. It's a wisdom that has shaped generations and generations of great human beings. You've got this. We've got this. Now let us begin together. Shana Tova.